Welcome to Primal Defense Combat Systema. I'm Andrew Grapsis, a certified instructor under Kevin Sikors. Today we're going to be talking about a really important subject. We're going to be talking about the foundations of structure. Now, I know immediately you're asking the question, what does structure have to do with breath? And the answer obviously is everything. In order to support a free-moving chest, and in order for us to really be able to maintain a strong column of air moving in and out of our lungs and allowing us to create strong verbalizations that are clear and have meaningful intent, in order for us to be optimal in our performance, we need to maintain good posture. So, when I'm talking about structure, I'm talking about the body's alignment in relation to itself. And really what that means is I'm talking about the different muscle groups and the different joints and how they relate to one another, the space between them, and their alignment. These techniques that we're going to go into when we talk about structure, and this is just the beginning of us talking about structure, come from a variety of different methodologies. Some are couched in combat Systema practice, others come from the Alexander technique, some may come from other areas such as voice instruction. Basically, I'm going to leverage every piece of knowledge I have about postural work, about mobility work, and about everything related to breath that I can. You'll notice that I am sitting, and in fact, I am on a stool. We are going to be working on seated posture work. I'm going to break most of structure down into 4 categorizations. The first will be seated work. The next will be prone work. The third aspect will be fully erect standing work. And the final part of our practice will relate to our structure in dynamic movement. And so when we're talking about structure in dynamic movement, what we're really discussing is how our body relates to the world around it while moving. That's really key for anyone who is practicing fighting arts. If you want to think about it, when you are grappling, when you are engaged in striking, there is postural work to be done. That postural work improves all other aspects of how you fight. Even if you're not fighting, postural work is extremely important for maintaining good spinal health, for being able to maintain your mobility, for being able to heal your body in many ways, shapes, and forms. The Russians like to say that you get old from the feet up and the spine out. So we're really going to be focusing on both of those aspects, the feet and the spine. The spine, in many cases, is the driver of all of our postural work. We need to become aware of the spine and the spine's alignment. There are 3 primary arcs of the spine that we talk about when we're talking about spinal work. If we look at the back, we can see that the lumbar is often that area and region that's talked about when people are advocating a chair. They talk about the lumbar support it has. But the 3 curves that come into play are the lumbar, the thoracic, and the cervical. So the lumbar is that lower portion, that beginning curve away from the base of the pelvis and the tailbone. Then there's another curve that kind of goes back all the way up through the shoulder blades, and that's the thoracic arch. And then there's the final curvature that is basically originating at the base of the neck and going all the way up into the skull. Your neck is part of your skull, and that's the cervical curve. So we have the lumbar, the thoracic, and the cervical curves. Sometimes you'll hear people say that correct posture is straightening your spine. The spine is composed of those 3 arcs. As such, it cannot be straightened. In fact, the straightening of a spine is actually a disorder that occurs when your spine and the muscles around them are not healthy. So we actually want to maintain those strong arches. All of our work will focus on creating space between our vertebrae, finding good curves in our spine, opening up the shoulders, creating a strong rotation of the pelvis to support the body, and making sure that we're grounded as we move and as we sit. This grounding, this rooting, will help us open our chest and find our breath. Okay, so to begin, you want to find a nice comfortable place to sit, somewhere firm that you can feel the seat under you. That's why I'm using a stool today. A couch is probably not an area I would recommend. We tend to kind of slouch. So we really want something where you're going to be forced to support your own spine, and we're not going to be artificially leaning into and slouching into a surface. So we want to start with something simple, flat, and hard ideally. And that way, you're forced to support your own spinal alignment. The most basic exercise we're going to perform when it comes to structure is finding our basic structure. In order to do this, I want you to find that hard place to sit. I want you to sit down, and you need to begin feeling your sits bones. These are bones that are basically at the base of your butt. They're the very bottom of that pelvis. We want to actually be physically sitting on the bone and engaged with the bone. Oftentimes people sit just back on the thigh. We don't want to be sitting on the thigh muscle. We can, but if we do, we want to rotate that pelvis and find those bones so that we're engaging the bones. If you want to think about it, those bones are the foundation of your spine. We need a good foundation to build strong spinal arches from. So find your sits bones. This may require some level of wiggling around. Where is the actual bone inside of your glute? Go ahead and kind of wiggle around to find it. We're going to establish a base. Next, your feet must be touching the ground. Plant them nice and firmly. This will establish our foundation and support. You want to think about the weight of your body driving into those bones, and then any remaining weight going down into the thighs and being grounded. My voice instructor used to say, you want to feel rooted to the earth, as if you had deep roots like a tree embedded in the ground. Now, when we're getting into dynamic movement, we don't want to be a tree rooted to the ground. That would be really horrible for our survival in a variety of combat contexts. But for this particular practice, finding that good static posture is crucial. Next, we want to begin generating length throughout the entire spine. The easiest way to do this is with our primary control, which will be our head. The head is actually really heavy. When you think about it, we have this mass sitting on top of a very tiny pivot point that is the neck and the vertebrae of the neck. So we're going to focus on the neck as our mover capable of straightening out the spine. The way we're going to do this is, first there's a bit of imaging work. We're going to imagine our head floating away from the pelvis. So you want to envision that head rising up and floating away from that pelvis. Your pelvis should feel heavier and heavier, and your head lighter and lighter. The simple way to do this from a vocalization perspective is to begin dropping your jaw down until you begin feeling that your speech is impinged. Once you feel that your speech is impinged, rise up slowly until you find the place where it's no longer impinged. A lot of people tend to flex the neck and extend all the way up, and they have an overextension of the neck, creating this arch right here incorrectly. And they do this because they're told to have a high crown, that they should raise their neck, they should have a lofty head. And they then lean backwards instead of extending the spinal column and using the spine to support the head. So we want to prevent this overcorrection by finding that place where our breath is impinged. Breathe there a few times. Feel how uncomfortable it is, and then allow the neck to rotate up until there is a lack of tension. The way my voice instructor used to explain this is that you have to imagine that she called it the monk's bald spot. And this always upset me because I was terrified of becoming bald. So she called it the monk's bald spot. And you have to imagine, so that's a spot right here. Imagine a rope pulling and tugging gently here. So that tug, because it's so far back, isn't going to rock your neck backwards. And it's not going to rock it too far forward. Instead, it's going to pull it up with a little bit of that forward rotation being established. So keeping those sits bones nice and engaged, driving down through the legs, and feeling that extension via that imaginary rope. I'm actually physically pulling on my hair to illustrate it. We're beginning to stretch out that spine and establish good, healthy curves. What I find helps me is to then take my hands and place them just above my hip bones, thumbs down, and really push. Not in a very muscular way, but just enough to really extend my body. I'm just creating another level of awareness by applying pressure. Breathe while you do this, of course. And take a second. And if you've been doing enough breath awareness work, you should notice that when you inhale, you rock a little bit back, maybe your spine extends a little bit, the chest opens up. And then when you exhale, the chest closes down, you rock a little bit forward. The reason I'm illustrating this and calling attention specifically to it is that there's this thought that we can find static structure that's perfect, and you can't, because the body is constantly in dynamic movement. Every inhale, every exhale brings with it another level of movement. So we actually want to use that movement to bring progressive opening to our shoulders and progressive lengthening through our spine. This is inner work. So again, it's not something you kind of just dive into and say, I will elongate the spine, I will open up the chest, and you're perfect at it. You need to practice it. For now, for all simplicity's sake, find the sits bones, really focus on those legs, find that proper alignment with the neck, allow your neck and head to feel like they're floating up, pulling on that spine. The pelvis is floating downwards with gravity, pulling on the other end of the spine, and like a string, pulling it in both directions. Okay, hands, go back down to your hips, open it up. And now what I want us to do a little bit of is engaging our scapula. So we want to take those shoulder blades and pinch them ever so slightly. You should feel a pull across the chest. We're going to open up the shoulder girdle. Personally, I get knots here and here all the time. I get knots in my deltoids all the time. And a lot of that has to do with just the general rotating inwards. The general rotating inwards that occurs day to day as we kind of look at our devices, walk through spaces, or shut down. And there's very much a biological component to our emotions, a physiological component to our emotions. So if we're having a bad day, if we don't feel like we're being heard, if we get into a fight, there's a good chance that your shoulders are going to roll in. And I see this all the time. I could be on the subway in Manhattan and I go, you had a bad day, you had a bad day, you had a bad life. And what you see is shoulders up or in, or up and in even. So what we want to do is, again, finding our good posture, palms against the hips, roll back the shoulders, engage the scapula. So I know I have a black shirt, it's not ideal, but engaging that scapula, finding that length, jaw dropping a little bit. And this is our basic structure. It should feel overly rigid to begin with. And the reason for that is that you haven't been engaged with it for days, weeks, months, a prolonged period of time. Eventually, you'll be able to keep those shoulders nice and open while you talk, while you have a communication with somebody, while you have a dialogue. You'll be able to maintain that good, strong foundational base and be able to gesture from it, have any type of conversation you need, move your head, return to alignment, find the posture again, open with each breath, feel the closing down, feel the constant expansion, and go with it. One last little detail before we call it a day. I would like for you to start thinking about your arms as separate from your chest, which sounds absolutely ridiculous because they're clearly attached. They're attached by all this musculature over here that wraps around into the pectoral, goes over the back. You have tendons and ligaments that are flowing all over these shoulders. And so it's really hard to separate them out. But it's crucial in order for us to be able to open the chest. And we want to have a very flowing and open chest in order for us to optimize our breathing. Begin by thinking of the arms as separate. Let's let them hang at our sides for a moment. Make a relaxed fist, not an overly tight fist, not an open hand, just a relaxed fist. They'll naturally want to close. Allow them to naturally close and be comfortable in that relaxed fist and hang at your sides. Feel as if your hands are carrying 50-pound kettlebells. They're just absolutely heavy. Your fists are made of steel. Even better, your fists are made of tungsten. Just driving downwards. Keep that scapula slightly engaged so the shoulder blades are slightly pinched. Those shoulders, you can roll them back if they feel like they're a little too forward. And those hands are getting heavier and heavier driving down. At the same time, you should begin to feel the connection inside the shoulder joint. And what I want you to begin thinking is that the deltoids, that this section and this section are pulling away from one another. So your shoulder is floating free. We have those weights driving us down, and they're freely floating out to the sides, not by the hand, but by the actual joint itself. Every breath, so make sure you're breathing, every breath, so take in a nice big breath, and feel how that breath causes that expansion and that floating away of the shoulders. And when you breathe out, what I want your thought to be is continued expansion. I know physically we're contracting, and that's okay. In your mind, think expansion. Good, and let's come back to our neutral posture. Hands on the hips, opening the shoulders nicely, and relax a little bit. One last little piece of advice. You'll hear in some fighting systems or in some techniques that individuals say, relax. Relax all of your muscles. You should have no tension. It's important to understand from a physiological perspective that is absolute bunkum. Every single movement you take requires a mix of relaxation and tension. That's how muscles fundamentally work. So, this concept that we're going to be fully relaxed and we're going to have no tension in our body and then be able to do anything is absolutely absurd. If that was possible, we would basically be puddles of jelly on the ground. As such, what we want to do is selectively relax and selectively tense. So instead of really thinking about relaxation and tension, we want to think about expansion. We want to expand the correct regions of our body. And we want to establish mobility not by utter relaxation, because that wouldn't make any sense, but through that expansion, the natural expansion of our shoulder away from the body, for example. And we want to have a good ability to dissociate the shoulder from the rest of our body. And that is only going to come through this structural work married to your breathing. All right, we're going to do a lot more on structure. We're going to talk about the jaw. We're going to talk about standing structure, prone structure. We're going to talk about structure until you never want to hear the term structure again. And all of it is going to feed back into your breath work. I hope you enjoyed this practice. Feel free to leave comments, and as always, stay safe.